Fluffy struts her stuff. Fluffy, fetch, said Perfect Peter. Snore. Fluffy, fetch, said Perfect Peter. Snore. Go on, Fluffy, said Perfect Peter, dangling a squeaky toy tarantula in front of the snoozing cat. Fetch! Fat Fluffy stretched. Yawn. Snore, snore. What are you doing, worm? Said Horrid Henry. Peter jumped. Should he tell Henry about his brilliant idea? What if Henry copied him? That would be just like Henry. Well, let him try, thought Peter. Fluffy is my cat. I'm training Fluffy for Scruffs, said Peter. She's sure to win this year. Scruffs was the annual neighbourhood pet show. Last year, Henry had spent one of the most boring days of his life watching horrible dogs compete for who looked the most like their owner, or who had the waggiest tail or fluffiest coat. Horrid Henry snorted. Which category? Said Henry. Ugliest owner? Fattest cat? Most obedient? Said Peter. Horrid Henry snorted again. Trust his worm, toad, nappy-faced brother to come up with such a dumb idea. Fat Fluffy was the world's most useless cat. Fluffy did nothing but eat and sleep and snore. She was so lazy that Horrid Henry was shocked every time she moved. Perfect Peter waved the rubber tarantula in front of Fluffy's face. He knew Henry would make fun of him. Well, this time, Peter, would have the last laugh. He would show the world what an amazing cat Fluffy was, and no one, especially Henry, could stop him. Peter knew that Fluffy had hidden greatness. After all, thought Peter, not everyone knows how clever I am. The same was true of Fluffy. Fluffy, when I squeak this toy, you sit up and give me your paw, said Peter. When I squeak it twice, you roll over. You can't train a cat, Toad, said Henry. Yes, I can, said Peter, and don't call me Toad. What did Henry know anyway? Nothing. Peter had seen dogs herding sheep, jumping through hoops, even dancing. True, they had all been dogs, and Fluffy was a cat, but she was no ordinary cat. Horrid Henry smirked. OK, Peter, because I'm such a nice brother, I'll show you how to train Fluffy, said Henry. Can you really? Said Peter. Yep, said Henry. When I give the command, Fluffy will do exactly what I say. So far, that was more than Peter had managed. A lot more. And it will only cost you £1, said Henry. Well, it was definitely worth £1 if it meant Fluffy could win most obedient. Peter handed over the money. Now watch and learn, worm, said Horrid Henry. Fluffy, sleep. Fluffy slept. See, said Henry. She obeyed. Perfect Peter was outraged. That doesn't count, said Peter. I want my money back. You can't have it, said Henry. I did exactly what I said I would do. Mum! Wailed Peter. Henry tricked me. Shut up, Toad, said Horrid Henry. Mum! Henry told me to shut up, screamed Peter. Henry
Henry, don't be horrid, shouted Mum. Horrid Henry wasn't listening. He was an idiot. He had just had the most brilliant, spectacular idea. He could train Fluffy and play the best ever trick on Peter in the history of the world. No, the universe. That would pay Peter back for getting Henry into such big trouble over breaking Mum's camera. One day, thought Horrid Henry, he would write a famous book collecting all his best tricks and sell it for £1 million a copy. Parliament would declare a special holiday, Henry Day, to celebrate his brilliance. There would be street parties and parades in his honour. The Queen would knight him. But until then, he had work to do. Horrid Henry gave Peter back his £1 coin. Perfect Peter was amazed. Henry never handed back money voluntarily. He looked at the coin suspiciously. Had Henry substituted a plastic pound coin like the last time? That was just a joke, said Henry smoothly. Of course I can train Fluffy for you. How? Said Peter. He'd been trying for days. That's my secret, said Henry. But I am so confident I can do it, I'll even give you a money-back guarantee. A money-back guarantee? That sounded almost too good to be true. In fact, is this a trick? Said Peter. No, said Henry. Out of the goodness of my heart, I offered to spend my valuable time training your cat. I'm insulted. Just for that, I won't. Okay, said Peter. How much? Yes, thought Horrid Henry. £5, said Henry. £5? Gasped Peter. That's a bargain, said Henry. Not everyone can train a cat. Okay, £5 money-back guarantee that Fluffy will obey 4 commands in time for Scruffs. If not, you'll get your money back. How could he lose? Thought Peter. Deal, he said. Yes, thought Horrid Henry. Somehow he didn't think he'd have too much trouble training Fluffy to stay, sleep, breathe, snore. No trouble at all. Perfect Peter bounced up and down with excitement. Today was the big day. Today was the day when he took Fluffy to win Most Obedient Pet at Scruffs. Shouldn't I practice with her? Said Peter. No, said Henry quickly. Cats are tricky. You only get one chance to make them obey, so we need to save it for the judge. Okay, Henry, said Peter. After all, Henry had given him a money-back guarantee. Greedy Graham was at the park with his enormous guinea pig, Fatty. Rude Ralph had brought his mutt, Windbag, who was competing for waggiest tail. Sour Susan was there with her pug, Grumpy. Aerobic Al was there with his greyhound, Speedy. Lazy Linda's rabbit, Snore, dozed on her shoulder. Even Miss Lovely had brought her Yorkie, Baby Jane. There were pets everywhere. What's your dog called, Bert? Said Henry. I don't know, said Beefy Bert. Wailed Weepy William. Mr. Socks didn't win the Fluffiest Kitty contest. Piddle, sit! Came a familiar, steely voice, like a jagged knife being dragged across a boulder. Horrid Henry gasped. There was Miss Battleaxe, walking beside the most groomed dog Henry had ever seen. The poodle was covered in ribbons and fancy collars and velvet bows. He watched as Miss Battleaxe found a quiet corner and put on some music. Boom, 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 boom. Miss Battleaxe danced around Piddle. She clicked her fingers. Piddle danced around Miss Battleaxe. Miss Battleaxe danced backwards, waving her arms and clicking again. Piddle danced backwards. Miss Battleaxe danced forward, hopping. Piddle danced forwards. Double click. Miss Battleaxe danced off to the left. Piddle danced off to the right. Then they met back at the centre. Finally, Miss Battleaxe crouched and Piddle jumped over her.
Wow,
said Perfect Peter, glancing at Fat Fluffy snoring on the grass.
do you think we could teach Fluffy to do tricks like that?
Already have, said Horrid Henry. Peter gazed at Henry open-mouthed.
Really?
said Peter. Yep, said Henry. Just squeeze the tarantula and tell Fluffy what you wanted to do.
Line up here for most obedient pets,
said the organiser.
That's me,
said Peter. All you have to remember, 1 squeak to make Fluffy sit up, 2 squeaks to make her walk on her hind legs, said Henry as they stood in the queue. 3 squeaks will make her come running to you.
Okay, Henry,
said Peter. Tee. Revenge was sweet, thought Horrid Henry. Wouldn't Peter look an idiot trying to give orders to a cat? And naturally, he'd find a way to keep Peter's £5. Peter handed in his entry ticket at the enclosure's entrance. Sorry, your brother's too young, said the man at the gate. You'll have to show the cat. Horrid Henry froze with horror. Me? said Horrid Henry. But
she's my cat, said Perfect Peter.
Come along, we're about to start, said the man, shoving Henry and Fat Fluffy into the ring. Horrid Henry found himself standing in the centre. He had the only cat. Everyone was staring and pointing and laughing. Oh, where was a cloak of invisibility when you needed one?
put your pets through their paces now,
shouted the judge. All the dogs started to sit, stay, come, pitch. Piddle the poodle began to dance. Fluffy lay curled in a ball at Henry's feet. Stay, said Horrid Henry as the judge walked by. Maybe he could get Fluffy at least to sit up, or even just move a bit. Horrid Henry squeezed the tarantula toy. Come on, Fluffy, move! Fluffy didn't even raise her head. Fluffy, wake up! Aerobic Owl's dog began to bark. Horrid Henry squeezed the tarantula toy again. Piddle stood on his hind legs and danced in a circle. No, Piddle, hissed Miss Battleaxe, gesturing wildly. Turn to the right! Fluffy, sit, said Horrid Henry. Babbling Bob's mutt started growling. Come on, Fluffy, thought Horrid Henry desperately, squeezing the toy in front of the dozing cat. Do something! Anything! Piddle ran over and peed on the judge's leg. Piddle! Squawked Miss Battleaxe. No! Squeak! Sour Susan's dog Grumpy bit the dog next to him. Horrid Henry waved his arms. Come on, Fluffy, you can do it! Weepy William's dog started running in circles. Piddle, come back! Shrieked Miss Battleaxe as Piddle ran from the ring, howling. Every other dog chased after him, barking and yelping, their owners running after them screaming. The only animal left was Fat Fluffy. Fluffy, stay, ordered Horrid Henry. Snore, snore, snore.
The cat's the winner,
said the judge. Yippee! Screamed Perfect Peter. I knew you could do it, Fluffy! Horrid Henry's rainy day. Horrid Henry was bored. Horrid Henry was fed up. He'd been banned from the computer for rampaging through our town museum. He'd been banned from watching TV just because he was caught watching a teeny tiny bit extra after he'd been told to switch it off straight after Mutant Max. Could he help it if an exciting new series about a rebel robot had started right after? How would he know if it were any good unless he watched some of it? It was completely unfair, and all Peter's fault for telling on him. And Mum and Dad were the meanest, most horrible parents in the world. And now he was stuck indoors all day long with absolutely nothing to do. The rain splattered down. The house was grey. The world was grey. The universe was grey. "I'm bored," wailed Horrid Henry. "Read a book," said Mum. "Do your homework," said Dad. "No," said Horrid Henry. "Then tidy your room," said Mum. "Unload the dishwasher," said Dad. "Empty the bins," said Mum. "No way!" shrieked Horrid Henry. What was he, a slave? Better keep out of his parents' way, or they'd come up with even more horrible things for him to do. Horrid Henry stomped up to his boring bedroom and slammed the door. Ugh! He hated all his toys. He hated all his music. He hated all his games. Ugh! What could he do? Aha! He could always check to see what Peter was up to. Perfect Peter was sitting in his room arranging stamps in his stamp album. "Peter is a baby, Peter is a baby," jeered Horrid Henry, sticking his head round the door. "Don't call me baby," said Perfect Peter. "OK, Duke of Poop," said Henry. "Don't call me Duke," shrieked Peter. "OK, Poopsicle," said Henry. "Mum!" wailed Peter. "Henry called me Poopsicle." "Don't be horrid, Henry," shouted Mum. "Stop calling your brother names." Horrid Henry smiled sweetly at Peter. "OK, Peter. 'Cause I'm so nice, I'll let you make a list of 10 names that you don't want to be called," said Henry, "and it will only cost you £1. £1? Perfect Peter could not believe his ears. Peter would pay much more than that never to be called Poopsicle again. "Is this a trick, Henry?" said Peter. "No," said Henry. "How dare you! I made you a good offer, and you accuse me. Well, just for that—" "Wait," said Peter. "I accept." He handed Henry a £1 coin. At last all those horrid names would be banned. Henry would never call him Duke of Poop again. Peter got out a piece of paper and a pencil. "Now let's see what to put on the list," thought Peter. "Poopsicle for a start. And I hate being called baby, and nappy face, and Duke of Poop." Peter wrote and wrote and wrote. "OK, Henry, here's the list," said Peter. "Names I don't want to be called. 1. Poopsicle. 2. Duke of Poop. 3. Ugly. 4. Nappy face. 5. Baby. 6. Toad. 7. Smelly toad. 8. Ugg.
9. Worm. 10. Wibble pants.
Horrid Henry scanned the list. Fine, pongy pants, said Henry. Sorry, I meant poopy pants. Or was it smelly nappy? Mum! Wailed Peter. Henry's calling me names! Henry! Screamed Mum. For the last time, can't you leave your brother alone? Horrid Henry considered. Could he leave that worm alone? Peter is a frog, Peter is a frog, chanted Henry. Mum! Screamed Peter. That's it, Henry, shouted Mum. No pocket money for a week. Go to your room and stay there. Fine, shrieked Henry. You'll all be sorry when I'm dead. He stomped down the hall and slammed his bedroom door as hard as he could. Why were his parents so mean and horrible? He was hardly bothering Peter at all. Peter was a frog, and he was only telling the truth. Boy, would they be sorry when he died of boredom stuck up here. If only we'd let him watch a little extra TV, Mum would wail. Would that have been so terrible? If only we hadn't made him do any chores, Dad would sob. Why didn't I let Henry call me names? Peter would howl. After all, I do have smelly pants. And now it's too late and we're so sorry, they would shriek. But wait, would they be sorry? Peter would grab his room and all his best toys. His arch enemy, stuck-up Steve, could come over and snatch anything he wanted, even his skeleton bank and goo shooter. Peter could invade the Purple Hand Fort, and Henry couldn't stop him. Moody Margaret could hop over the wall and nick his flag, and his biscuits, and his dungeon drink kit, even his super soaker. No! Horrid Henry went pale. He had to stop those rapacious thieves. But how? I could come back and haunt them, thought Horrid Henry. Yes, that would teach those grave robbers not to mess with me.
Ooh, get out of my room, you horrible toad,
He would moan at Peter.
touch my goo shooter, and you'll be morphed into ectoplasm.
He'd groan spookily from under stuck-up Steve's bed. Ha! That would show him. Or he'd pop out from inside Moody Margaret's wardrobe.
Give Henry's toy back, you miserable slimy snake.
He would rasp. That would teach her a thing or two. Henry smiled. But fun as it would be to haunt people, he'd rather stop horrible enemies snatching his stuff in the first place. And then suddenly, Horrid Henry had a brilliant, spectacular idea. Hadn't Mum told him just the other day that people wrote wills to say who they wanted to get all their stuff when they died? Henry had been thrilled. So, when you die, I get all your money. Henry beamed. Wow! The house would be his, and the car, and he'd be boss of the TV, 'cause it would be his too. And the only shame was... Couldn't you just give it all to me now? Asked Henry. Henry, snapped Mum, don't be horrid. There was no time to lose. He had to write a will immediately. Horrid Henry sat down at his desk and grabbed some paper. My will. Warning. Do not read unless I am dead. I mean it. If you're reading this, it's because I'm dead and you aren't. I wish you were dead and I wasn't, so I could have all your stuff. It's so not fair. First of all, to anyone thinking of snatching my stuff just because I'm dead, beware! Anyone who doesn't do what I say will get haunted by a bloodless and boneless ghoul, namely me, so there. Now the hard bit, thought Horrid Henry. Who should get his things? Was anyone deserving enough? Peter, you are a worm, and a toad, and an ugly baby, nappy-faced, smelly wibble pants poopsicle. I leave you... That toad really shouldn't get anything. But Peter was his brother, after all. I leave you my sweet wrappers and a muddy twig. That was more than Peter deserved. Still... Steve, you are stuck up and horrible and the world's worst cousin. You can have a pair of my socks. You can choose the blue ones with the holes or the falling down orange ones. Margaret, you nit-face, I give you the purple hand flag to remember me by. Not! You can have 2 radishes and the knight with the chopped off head, and keep your paws off my grisly grub box, or else. Miss Battleaxe, you are my worst teacher ever. I leave you a broken pencil. Aunt Ruby, you can have the lime green cardigan back that you gave me for Christmas. So far, he wasn't doing so well giving away any of his good things. Ralph, you can have my goo shooter, but only if you give me your football and your bike and your computer game slime ghouls. That was more like it. After all, why should he be the only one writing a will? It was certainly a lot more fun thinking about getting stuff from other people than giving away his own treasures. In fact, wouldn't he be better off helping others by telling them what he wanted? Wouldn't it be awful if rich Aunt Ruby left him some of Steve's old clothes in her will, thinking that he would be delighted? Better write to her at once. Dear Aunt Ruby, I am leaving you something really, really great in my will, so make sure you leave me loads of cash in yours. Your favourite nephew, Henry. Now, Steve. Henry was leaving him an old pair of holy socks, but Steve didn't have to know that, did he? For all Henry knew, Steve loved holy socks. Dear Steve, you know your new blue racing bike with the silver trim? Well, when you're dead, it won't be any use to you, so please leave it to me in your will. Your favourite cousin, Henry. P.S. By the way, no need to wait till you're dead. You can give it to me now. Right. Mum and Dad. When they were in the old people's home, they'd hardly need a thing. A rocking chair and blanket each would do fine for them. So, how would Dad's music system look in his bedroom? And where could he put Mum's clock radio? Henry had always liked the chiming clock on their mantelpiece and the picture of the blackbird. Better go and check to see where he could put them. Henry went into Mum and Dad's room and grabbed an armload of stuff. He staggered to his bedroom and dumped everything on the floor, then went back for a second helping. Stumbling and staggering under his heavy burden, Horrid Henry swayed down the hall and crashed into Dad. What are you doing? Said Dad, staring. That's mine. And those are mine, said Mum. What is going on? Shrieked Mum and Dad. I was just checking how all this stuff will look in my room when you're in the old people's home, said Horrid Henry. there yet, said Mum. Put everything back, said Dad. Horrid Henry scowled. Here he was, just trying to think ahead, and he gets told off. Well, just for that, I won't leave you any of my nights in my will, said Henry. Honestly, some people were so selfish. Horrid Henry's Bake-Off. Thwack! 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 Moody Margaret thwacked the wall with a stick. Why, oh why, did she have to live next door to someone as horrid as Henry? Her club wasn't safe, her biscuits weren't safe, and he was such a copycat. She'd told everyone she was making a chocolate sponge cake for the street party bake-off competition. And now Henry was saying he was making a chocolate sponge cake. And pretending he'd thought of it first. Well, she'd show him. Her cake was sure to win. For once, she'd have the last laugh. Although, maybe she could make sure of that. A street party bake-off! Hurrah! Horrid Henry loved baking. What could be better than choosing exactly what you wanted to eat and then cooking it exactly as you liked it, with loads of extra sugar and lashings of icing? Horrid Henry loved making fudge. Horrid Henry loved making brownies. Horrid Henry loved baking chocolate cakes. His parents, unfortunately, only liked him to make horrible food. Pizzas ruined with vegetable toppings, sloppy, gloppy porridge. And if they ever let him make muffins, they had to be wholesome muffins, with wholemeal flour and bananas. But today, no one could stop him. It was a cake baking contest. And what a cake he'd make! His chocolate sponge cake with extra icing was guaranteed to win. He'd heard that copycat Margaret was making one too. Let old Frog-Face try. No one could outbake Chef Henry. Plus, the winner would get their picture in the paper and be on TV because the famous pastry chef Cherry Berry was coming to judge. Whoopee! Everyone in Henry's class was taking part. Too bad, losers, thought Horrid Henry, dashing to the kitchen. Chef Henry is in the room. Unfortunately, someone else was too. Perfect Peter was wearing a Daffy Daisy apron and peering anxiously at the oven while Mum took out a baking tray laden with mysterious grey globs. Out of my way, worm, said Henry. I've made cupcakes for the bake-off, said Peter. Look. Perfect Peter proudly pointed to the plate covered in lumpy blobs. His name was written on a flag poking out of one cupcake. Those aren't cupcakes, said Henry. They're lopsided cow pats. Mum, wailed Peter. Henry called my cupcakes cow pats. Don't be horrid, Henry, said Mum. Peter, I think your cupcakes look lovely. Plop cakes, more like, said Henry. Ah! screamed Peter. Henry's had pancakes! Stop it, Henry, said Mum. All the better for him. No need to worry about Peter's saggy disasters winning. His real competition was Margaret. Henry hated to admit it, but she was almost as good a chef as he was. Well, no way was she beating him today. Her copycat chocolate sponge cake wouldn't be a patch on his. Henry, Peter, come out and help hang up the bunting and get cloths on the tables, said Dad. The street party starts at 2 o'clock. But I have to bake my cake, yelped Henry, weighing the sugar and chocolate. He always put in extra. There's plenty of time, said Mum, but I need you to help me now. Moody Margaret sneaked through the back door into Henry's kitchen. She'd waited until she'd seen Henry and his family go outside to help set up the tables. If she was too late and his cake was already baking, she could open the oven door and stomp to make Henry's sponge collapse. Or she could turn the temperature way up high. Or scoop out the middle. Or... Margaret sniffed. She couldn't smell anything baking. What a bit of luck. There were all Henry's ingredients on the counter, measured out and waiting to be used. Snatch! Moody Margaret grabbed the sugar jar and emptied it into the bin. Then she refilled it with salt. Gee, thought Moody Margaret, wouldn't it be wonderful to pay Henry back? What are you doing here? Came a little voice. Oops. Moody Margaret whirled round. What are you doing here? Said Margaret. I live here, said Peter. I must have come into the wrong house, said Margaret. How silly of me. Out of my way, worm! Came Henry's horrible voice as he slammed the front door. Bye, said Margaret as she skedaddled out of the back door. Phew! Revenge was sweet, she thought happily. Or in this case, salty. Should he tell Henry that Margaret had come over? No, thought Peter. Henry called my cupcakes plopcakes. Horrid Henry proudly stuck his name flag in his fabulous cake. What a triumph! His glorious chocolate sponge, drowning in luscious icing, was definitely his best ever. He was sure to win. He was absolutely sure to win. Just wait till Jerry Berry tried a mouthful of his cake. He'd be offered his own TV baking programme. He'd write his own cookbook. But instead of horrible recipes like 10 ways to cook broccoli, as if that would make any difference to how yucky it was, he'd have recipes for things kids actually liked to eat, instead of what their parents wanted them to eat. Chips, chocolate worms, Frosty-Freeze ice cream, veg-free cheese pizza. He'd write, take wrapping of pizza, put in oven. Or, if you're feeling lazy, ring pizza delivery to skip the boring unwrapping and putting in oven bit. Yes! He'd add a few recipes with ketchup, then sit back and count the dough. Horrid Henry sighed happily. Didn't that icing look yummalicious? He'd left loads in the bowl and more on the spoon. Oh, boy, chocolate, here I come, thought Horrid Henry. Chefs always taste their own food, don't they? He thought, shoving a huge, succulent spoonful into his mouth. And yuck! Horrid Henry gagged. He spat it out, gasping and choking. It tasted worse than anything he'd ever tasted in his life. It was horrible, disgusting, revolting, worse than sprouts. It was so bitter, so salty. Horrid Henry choked down some water. How was it possible? What could he have done? He'd been so careful, measuring out the ingredients. How could a teaspoon of salt have got into his icing? But this wasn't even a teaspoon. This was a bucket load. There was only one explanation. Sabotage. Peter must have done it, in revenge for Henry calling his cupcakes cowpats. Wait till I get my hands on you, Peter! You'll be sorry, you wormy worm toad! Wait. Horrid Henry paused. Was Perfect Peter evil enough to have come up with such a dastardly plan? No. Was he clever enough? No. It had to be someone so vile, so sly, so despicable, they would sabotage a cake. There was only one person he knew who fitted that description. Margaret. Well, he'd show her. Root-a-toot! Root-a-toot! Root-a-toot-toot-toot! Margaret was blasting away on her trumpet, blasting what she thought was a victory tune. Not this time, frog face, thought Horrid Henry, sneaking into Moody Margaret's kitchen. There was her chocolate sponge cake, resting proudly on a flowery china stand. What luck she'd copied him. Whisk! Henry snatched Margaret's cake. Switch! Henry plopped his salt cake on the cake stand instead. Swap! He stuck the name flag Margaret into his old cake. Then he sneaked back home, clutching his stolen one. Horrid Henry placed his name flag in Margaret's cake and stood back. He had to admit, Margaret's cake was gorgeous. So chocolatey, so springy, so much chocolate icing whirling and swirling in thick globs. Margaret was a moody old grouch, but she certainly knew how to bake a cake. It looked good enough to eat. And then suddenly Horrid Henry had a horrible thought. What if Margaret had baked a decoy cake, made with soap powder instead of flour, and left it out to tempt him to steal it? Margaret was so evil, it would be just like her to come up with such a cunning plan. "Don't let her fool you twice!" screeched Henry's tummy. He'd better take the teensiest bite, just to make sure. He'd cover up the hole with icing, no problem. Horrid Henry took a tiny bite from the back. Oh my, chocolate heaven! This cake was great! Wow! But what if she'd put some bad bits in the middle? He'd better take another small bite just to check. He wouldn't want Cherry Berry to be poisoned. Oh dear. Horrid Henry stopped chewing. Where'd that huge hole in the cake come from? He couldn't have... Yikes. What was he thinking? There was only one thing to do. He had to fill the hole fast. If he covered it with icing, no one would ever know. What could he fill the cake with to disguise the missing piece? Newspaper? Nah, too bumpy. Rice? Too bitty. Horrid Henry looked wildly around the kitchen. Aha! A sponge. A sponge for a sponge cake. He was a genius. Quickly, Horrid Henry cut the sponge to fit the hole, slipped it inside, and covered the joins with more icing. Perfect. No one would ever know. Mum came into the kitchen. Hurry up, Henry, and bring your cake out. It's street party time. Horrid Henry had a brilliant time at the street party. Everyone was there. Magic Martha did magic tricks in the corner. Jazzy Jim banged on his keyboard. Singing Soraya warbled behind the bouncy castle. Jolly Josh showed off his tap dancing. Even Margaret playing solo trumpet and Perfect Peter singing with his band, the Golden Goodies, couldn't ruin Henry's mood. He'd eyed the other contestants as they carried their interest to the bake-off table. Rude Ralph had brought burnt brownies. Sour Susan had made horrible-looking gingerbread. Greedy Graham had made a tottering tower of sweets with chocolate hairballs, foam teeth, belcher-squelchers and blobby gobbers. Then there were Peter's lopsided lumpies. And allergic Alice's gluten-free, nut-free, sugar-free, flour-free, dairy-free beetroot rice cake. Taste-free, too, thought Horrid Henry. And a ragtag collection of droopy cakes and wobbly pies. "Ah!" wailed Weepy William. "I dropped mine." Horrid Henry and Moody Margaret shoved through the crowd as the famous Judge Cherryberry stood behind the cake table. Henry had made sure his cake was at the front. Margaret had also made sure her cake was at the front. The two chocolate sponges faced each other. "No, no, 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 my cake is best," jeered Margaret. "No, no, 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 my cake is best," jeered Henry. They glared at each other. "Tee-hee," thought Margaret. "Tee-hee," thought Henry. "Stand back from the cakes, you'll all get a chance to taste them soon," said Cherryberry. She walked around the table, eyeing the goodies. She poked one, prodded another, sniffed a third. She walked round again, and again. Then she stopped in front of Henry and Margaret's cakes. Henry held his breath. Yes! "Now, don't these sponge cakes look lovely?" said Cherryberry. "So attractive, so fluffy. Ooh, I do love a light sponge," she said, cutting a piece and taking a big bite. "So spongy," she choked, spitting out a piece of yellow kitchen sponge. "Rats," thought Horrid Henry. Cherryberry checked the name on the flag. "Henry's cake is disqualified." "Double rats," thought Horrid Henry. Screeched Moody Margaret. "The winner is Margaret." "Yes!" shrieked Margaret. "Ah! That was his cake! It was so unfair! His cake had won after all! He'd pay Margaret back!" "I'll just try a little piece before we share it with everyone," said Cherryberry, taking a huge bite. Gagged Cherry, spitting it out. Salt! Salt! Instead of sugar! What? Screamed Moody Margaret. How was it possible that salt had been sneaked into her cake? Unless... You put a sponge in my cake! Shouted Margaret. You put salt in my cake! Shouted Henry. Horrid Henry grabbed a pie and hurled it at Margaret. Moody Margaret grabbed a cake and hurled it at Henry. Horrid Henry ducked. Smack! The gooey cake landed in Cherryberry's face. Foo fight! Shrieked rude Ralph, snatching cupcakes and throwing them. Foo fight! Screamed greedy Graham, pitching pies into the crowd. Stop it! Stop it! Shouted Mum as whipped cream splattered on her head. Stop it! Shouted Dad as a lemon tart splattered on his shirt. Cherryberry brushed cake from her face and pie from her hair. Whoa! She wailed as cake dripped down her back. I have a soggy bottom. She staggered over to the cake table and gripped the edge. The table was empty, except for a few grey cupcakes. I proclaim Peter's lopsided lumpies the winner, she gasped. Yippee! Squealed Perfect Peter. No! Howled Horrid Henry. Horrid Henry robs the bank. I want the skull! I want the skull! I want the skull! Said Horrid Henry, glaring. You had it last time, Henry, said Perfect Peter. I never get it. Did not? Did too. I'm the guest, so I get the skull, said Moody Margaret, snatching it from the box. You can have the claw. No! Wailed Henry. The skull is my lucky piece. Margaret looked smug. You know I'm going to win, Henry, 'cause I always do. So ha ha ha. Wanna bet? Muttered Horrid Henry. The good news was that Horrid Henry was playing Gotcha, the world's best board game. Horrid Henry loved Gotcha. You rolled the dice and travelled round the board, collecting treasure, buying dragon lairs and praying you didn't land in your enemy's lairs or in the dungeon. The bad news was that Horrid Henry was having to play Gotcha with his worm-toed crybaby brother. The worst news was that Moody Margaret, the world's biggest cheater, was playing with them. Margaret's mum was out for the afternoon and had dumped Margaret at Henry's. Why, oh why did she have to play at his house? Why couldn't her mum just dump her in the bin where she belonged? Unfortunately, the last time they'd played Gotcha, Margaret had won. The last 2, 3, 4 and 5 times they'd played, Margaret had won. Margaret was a demon gotcha player. Well, not any longer. This time, Henry was determined to beat her. Horrid Henry hated losing. By hook or by crook, he would triumph. Moody Margaret had beaten him at gotcha for the very last time.
Who'll be banker?
Said Perfect Peter.
Me,
Said Margaret. Me, said Henry. Being in charge of all the game's treasure was an excellent way of topping up your coffers when none of the other players was looking.
I'm the guest, so I'm banker, said Margaret. You can be the dragon keeper.
Horrid Henry's hand itched to yank Margaret's hair. But then Margaret would scream, and Mum would send Henry to his room and confiscate gotcha until Henry was old and bald and dead.
Touch any treasure that isn't yours and you're dragon food,
hissed Henry.
Steal any dragon eggs that aren't yours and you'll taste,
hissed Margaret.
If you're banker and Henry's the dragon keeper, what am I? Said Perfect Peter.
A toad, said Henry, and count yourself lucky. Horrid Henry snatched the dice. I'll go first. The player who went first always had the best chance of buying up the best dragon layers like Eerie and Hideous Hellmouth.
No, said Margaret, I'll go first. I'm the youngest, I should go first, said Peter. Me, said Margaret, snatching the dice. I'm the guest.
Me, said Henry, snatching them back.
Me, said Peter.
Mum! Screamed Henry and Peter. Mum ran in. You haven't even started playing and already you're fighting, said Mum. It's my turn to go first, wailed Henry, Margaret and Peter. The rules say to roll the dice and whoever gets the highest number goes first, said Mum. End of story. She left, closing the door behind her. Henry rolled. 4. Not good. Peter's knee touched mine when I rolled the dice, protested Henry. I get another turn.
No, you don't, said Margaret.
Mum! Henry's cheating! Shrieked Peter. If I get called one more time, screamed Mum from upstairs, I will throw that game in the bin. Eek. Margaret rolled. 3. You breathed on me, hissed Margaret. Did not, said Henry. Did too, said Margaret. I get another go. No way, said Henry. Peter picked up the dice. Low roll, low roll, low roll, chanted Henry. Stop it, Henry, said Peter. Low roll, low roll, low roll, chanted Henry, louder. Peter rolled an 11.
Yippee! I go first,
trilled Peter. Henry glared at him. Perfect Peter took a deep breath and rolled the dice to start the game. 5. A fate square. Perfect Peter moved his gargoyle to the fate square and picked up a fate card. Would it tell him to claim a treasure hoard or send him to the dungeon? He squinted at it.
The ogre, I can't read it, he said. The words are too hard for me.
Henry snatched the card. It read, the ogres make you king for a day, collect 20 rubies from the other players. The ogres make you king for a day. Give 20 rubies to the player on your left, read Henry. Oh, that's me, so pay up. Perfect Peter handed Henry 20 rubies. Thought Horrid Henry.
I think you read that fate card wrong, Henry, said Moody Margaret grimly.
Uh-oh. If Margaret read Peter the card, he was dead. Mum would make them stop playing, and Henry would get into trouble. Big, big trouble. Didn't, said Henry. Did, said Margaret. I'm telling on you. Horrid Horrid Henry looked at the card again. Whoops! Silly me. I read it too fast, said Henry. It says, give 20 rubies to all the other players. Thought so, said moody Margaret. Perfect Peter rolled the dice. 9! Oh, no! That took Peter straight to Eerie, Henry's favourite lair. Now Peter could buy it. Everyone always landed on it and had to pay ransom or get eaten. Rats, rats, rats!
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Look, Henry, I've landed on Eerie and no one owns it yet, said Peter.
Don't buy it, said Henry. It's the worst lair on the board. No one ever lands on it. You'd just be wasting your money.
Oh,
said Peter. He looked doubtful. But, said Peter. Save your money for when you land in other people's lairs, said Henry. That's what I'd do.
OK, said Peter. I'm not buying.
Henry rolled. 6. Yes! He landed on Eerie. I'm buying it, crowed Henry.
But Henry, said Peter, you just told me not to buy it.
You shouldn't listen to me, said Henry. Mom! Wailed Peter. Soon Henry owned Eerie, Griffin Gulch and Creepy Hollow, but he was dangerously low on treasure. Margaret owned Rocky Ravine, Vulture Valley and Hideous Hellmouth. Margaret kept her treasure in her treasure pouch, so it was impossible to see how much money she had, but Henry guessed she was also low. Peter owned Demon Den and 1 dragon egg. Margaret was stuck in the dungeon. Yippee! This meant if Henry landed on one of her lairs, he'd be safe. Horrid Henry rolled and landed on Vulture Valley, guarded by a baby dragon. Gotcha! Shrieked Margaret. Give me 25 rubies. You're in the dungeon, you can't collect ransom, said Henry. Nah. Can? Can't. That's how we play in my house, said Margaret. In case you hadn't noticed, we're not at your house, said Henry. But I'm the guest, said Margaret. Give me my money. No, shouted Henry. You can't just make up rules.
The rules say,
began Perfect Peter. Shut up, Peter! Screamed Henry and Margaret. I'm not paying, said Henry. Margaret glowered. I'll get you for this, Henry, she hissed. It was Peter's turn. Henry had just upgraded his baby dragon guarding Eerie to a big, huge, fire-breathing, slavering monster dragon. Peter was only 5 squares away. If Peter landed there, he'd be out of the game. Land, chanted Henry. Yum, yum, yum! My dragon is just waiting to eat you up! Stop it, Henry, said Peter. He rolled.
5.
Gotcha! Shouted Horrid Henry. I own Eerie. You've landed in my lair. Pay up. That's 100 rubies.
I don't have enough money,
wailed Perfect Peter. Horrid Henry drew his finger across his throat. You're dead meat, worm, he chortled. Perfect Peter burst into tears and ran out of the room. He wailed, I lost! Horrid Henry glared at Moody Margaret. Moody Margaret glared at Horrid Henry. You're next to be eaten, snarled Margaret. You're next, snarled Henry. Ha 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 ha! Henry peeked under the gotcha board where his treasure was hidden. Oh no, not again! He'd spent so much on dragons he was down to his last few rubies. If he landed on any of Margaret's lairs, he'd be wiped out. He had to get more treasure. He had to. Why, oh why had he let Margaret be banker? His situation was desperate. Peter was easy to steal money from, but Margaret's eagle eyes never missed a trick. What to do? What to do? He had to get more treasure. He had to. And then, suddenly, Horrid Henry had a brilliant, spectacular idea. It was so brilliant that Henry couldn't believe he'd never thought of it before. It was dangerous, it was risky, but what choice did he have? "I need the loo," said Henry. "Hurry up," said Margaret, scowling. Horrid Henry dashed to the downstairs loo and sneaked straight out of the back door. Then he jumped over the garden wall and crept into Margaret's house. Quickly, he ran to her sitting room and scanned her games cupboard. Aha! There was Margaret's gotcha! Horrid Henry stuffed his pockets with treasure. He stuffed more under his shirt and in his socks. "Is that you, my little sugar plum?" came a voice from upstairs. "Maggie Moo Moo." Henry froze. Margaret's mum was home. "Maggie Plumpykins," cooed her mum, coming down the stairs. "Is that you?" "Oh, no," squeaked Henry. "I mean, yes," he squawked. "I've got to go back to Henry's. Bye." And Horrid Henry ran for his life. "You took a long time," said Margaret. Henry hugged his stomach. "Upset tummy," he lied. Oh boy, was he brilliant! Now, with loads of cash, which he would slip under the board, he was sure to win. Henry picked up the dice and handed them to Margaret. "Your turn," said Henry. Henry's hungry dragon stood waiting 6 places away in Goblin Gorge. "Roll a 6, roll a 6, roll a 6, prayed Horrid Henry. "Not a 6, not a 6, not a 6, prayed Moody Margaret. Margaret rolled. 4. She moved her skull to the haunted forest. "Your turn," said Margaret. Henry rolled a 3. Oh no! He'd landed on hideous Hellmouth, where Margaret's giant dragon loomed. "Yes!" squealed Margaret. "Gotcha! You're dead! Ha 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 ha! I won!" Moody Margaret leapt to her feet and did a victory dance, whooping and cheering. Horrid Henry smiled at her. "Oh dear," said Horrid Henry. "Oh dearie, dearie me. Looks like I'm dragon food." "Not!" "What do you mean, not?" said Margaret. "You're dead meat. You can't pay me." "Not so fast," said Horrid Henry. With a flourish, he reached under the board and pulled out a wodge of treasure. "Let me see, 100 rubies, is it?" said Henry, counting off a pile of coins. Margaret's mouth dropped open. "How did you... what? Huh? She spluttered. Henry shrugged modestly. "Some of us know how to play this game," he said. "Now roll." Moody Margaret rolled and landed on a fate square. "Go straight to Eerie Eerie," read the card. "Yatta!" shrieked Horrid Henry. He'd won! Margaret didn't have enough money to stop being eaten. She was dead. She was doomed. "I won! I won! You can't pay me! Na, 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 na!" shrieked Horrid Henry, leaping up and doing a victory dance. "I am the Gotcha King!" "Says who?" said Moody Margaret, pulling a handful of treasure from her pouch. "Huh? You stole that money!" spluttered Henry. "You stole the bank's money, you big fat cheater!" Did! "Cheater!" howled Moody Margaret. "Cheater!" howled Horrid Henry. Moody Margaret grabbed the board and hurled it to the floor. "I won!" said Horrid Henry. "Did not!" Ditto, Maggie Moo-Moo! Don't call me that, said Margaret, glaring. Call you what, Moo-Moo? I challenge you to a rematch, said Moody Margaret. You're on, said Horrid Henry.